One advantage of having a nature walk after lunch is that I used to teach in college. I used to be a professor for 10 years. And I had a 1 o'clock class. And not only would the students fall asleep on me, but I would have trouble staying awake giving the lecture. So hopefully, by moving around, we're going to be able to stay awake a little bit. You'll learn something. You won't remember everything, but you will have some general principles down in your mind. I want to explain a little bit what I didn't get to talk about because I think it's important. Picking up on what was discussed last night. When we stopped the Biodiversity Treaty from being ratified in Congress, in July of 1994, I knew it was about to come out. It was reported out of committee in the U.S. Senate for ratification. And so I knew it was coming up. And so it was scheduled for August 8th, or 10th, I mean, for the cloture vote and ratification vote. That was on August 4th. The evening of August 4th, I sent out a fax alert. Now, what is a fax alert? It was the leading technology of the day before email was in popular use. Email was used, but very, very few people used it. And it was the first technology in which you could get mass communication out by thousands and thousands of faxes overnight. And so we sent out 4,400 different faxes to different organizations. They're one-page faxes with a map on it, and I'll show you that map in just a minute, with an explanation of the bullet points of how dangerous this treaty was, because it would really, really hurt this country. And the treaty itself was only 18 pages long, and it had no detail to it. So anyway, I made the bullet points, sent it out, and the next day at 10 o'clock, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee called me and said, "What are you doing?" Well, I had just been in July down there talking to them. So they understood what I was trying to do. And they said, "Well, you're doing a good job because we're getting thousands and thousands of phone calls." Now, remember, we only sent out 4,400 and with our phone number on it. And that's great. You know, I began to realize that there was more to it than just what I did. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the actual president, not the president, but the Senate Majority Leader called, his office called. First words out of the woman's mouth, I had no idea who it was "call off your dogs." And I kind of was taken aback. Never got a phone call like that before. And I said, "Well, what is this about?" She said, she introduced herself, and I had met her back in July. And I said, "Well, we're trying to stop this treaty. It's very dangerous." And she says, "Well, you've got to stop." And I said, "Well, why? If it's doing that much good, why would I want to stop?" And she said, "The whole Senate phone system has crashed. It was computer driven." Every time they brought it back up for the next 2.5 days, it crashed again immediately because so many people were calling in. After the third day, she called back and she said for that to have happened, at least 3 to 4 million people had to have been trying to get into the Senate. I was literally stunned, realizing it was not me, but it was God. Something happened that God intervened and did that. You never know what's going to happen. That was my last ditch effort to try to stop it. I didn't think it was going to work. Anyway, they withdrew it from the Senate calendar. It was not voted on in August. I told the Senate Majority Leader, who was Mitchell at the time, and told him that he had to get a hold of this global biodiversity assessment. Now, if I had time, I would go through some of it to show you how bad it really was. It talked about reducing the human population by 2/3 in the next 50 years. And you'll see why in a minute it would be necessary to do that. But anyway, what we did then is that we had a contract with the United Nations to the IUCN that I told you about this morning, that specified that they had to write this global biodiversity assessment, the draft of which had to be in there in March of 1994. Now this was now August of 1994. And therefore it should be available in draft form. And I told Senator Mitchell, I knew him personally, that he needed to get a copy of that. And he tried to get it out of the United Nations, but was told by the United Nations they had no idea what he was asking for. They had no contract. The contract, you know, wherever I had was not from the United Nations, it was, but he needed to go back and get this treaty ratified. So he tried. Back in September, on the 29th of September, he scheduled another cloture vote, just to be followed by the ratification vote. That was on the 27th of September. By this time, I had met several other people from around the country that were also trying to stop this treaty. And one of them, in fact, I just talked to him yesterday, knew someone in New York itself that had connections into the United Nations, and they thought that that person, now listen to this, God has a sense of humor. He called that person, it was a woman, and the woman tried to get it out of the United Nations, didn't have any better luck than either we did or the Senate Majority Leader did. And so she knew someone in London who was even closer to the United Nations, contacted that person had no luck. But they knew someone in Bonn, Germany, which was the capital of Germany at the time, that also was working very closely with the United Nations. And so that person called the person in Bonn, Germany. By this time, any identification of who we were lost. They had no idea who we were or why we were wanting to get a hold of this copy of the biodiversity assessment. And that person in Germany didn't know either, but they knew somebody in Gland, Switzerland. Now, what is Gland, Switzerland? That's the headquarters of the IUCN. Are you making the connection? They wrote it. And they had no idea who we were. Well, this was on the 27th of September. The vote was on the 29th. They thought we were promoting the treaty, so they Federal Expressed it overnight, early morning delivery to us.
On their dime.
On their dime. One chapter was 400 pages long. One chapter. There were 4 of us. So we each took 100 pages. We faxed it back and forth and so forth. And went through it, line by line, highlighting those areas that the Senate really should know about. And in that process, there's a lot of things I could talk about. I'm only going to talk about this. It talked about using the Wildlands Project as the template. Now, I already knew the Wildlands Project was the template because the same people that developed the Wildlands Project wrote the treaty. Same group of people from within the IUCN. So I knew that, but I couldn't convince anybody else of that. So in the meantime, since 2000, I have been drawing this map that showed what the Wildlands Project would really do. This red area that you see there is areas where no humans can have any activity whatsoever other than maybe walking through it. The yellow areas are buffer zones to protect the red areas. You don't see much green left here, do you?
No.
That's why they have to reduce the Earth's population, human population, by 2/3 in the next 50 years, because there isn't going to be enough room for people in there. In other words, nature's needs always come before man's needs. I'm going to pass this around as we're taking our hike. But this map came out in a 4x6 foot poster at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the 29th. The vote was to be taken at 4 o'clock. It stopped it dead in its tracks. It was never even voted on. The reason I'm telling you about this is because of what was said last night. You never know how God is going to use you. I certainly didn't plan on this happening, but it did. And we stopped a $2 billion agenda dead in its tracks with just a couple $1,000s of our own efforts. So take a look at this. I'll pass this around. You can take a closer look as we're walking around, pass it to other people. And just take a look at where you live and see if it's in a red area. Now, red area doesn't mean it's going to be there, but I've been about 80% right, 80 to 90% right. When they finally designate these things, and they have designated a lot of it since I did this map in the 1990s, it basically shows how close I was, because I've worked in all these ecosystems, and I had the instructions. I knew how they were going to do it, so I've been pretty accurate. Okay, well, let's take a walk over this direction. I want to go around this side over here now.